Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling and welcome to another video. Today we are actually covering a bunch of Imperial Guard regiments, mainly because for a event at the store I'm doing, I'm using Imperial Guard as an escalation campaign, and it's just had me reading up more so on the Guard recently than I have been in the past. So I wanted to go through some of the big, substantial regiments. Of course, there are plenty of regiments of Guard, plenty here that I didn't include, because if I included them all, I'm sure there would just be 100 that look like Cadians. So I wanted to include a lot of the sort of notable alternative regiments, and some regiments that I'd say are pretty much lesser known, but are still very, very cool, and I wanted to include because, honestly, I've fallen in love with one of them. So first up, we have Armageddon Steel Legion. So Armageddon Steel Legion are very much the sort of Krieg before there was Krieg, if you will. They, of course, are gas mask wearing, heavy coat wearing siege experts, though they're more so on the defensive siege experts, because, of course, they have been the stars of all three Wars of Armageddon against the Orcs and that other one. And personally, I really quite like the Armageddon Steel Legion. I think they are a very cool regiment. I love their look, and I would really like for them to get an update. Maybe if we get a return of Yarick, we will see the return of the Steel Legion, obviously, because Yarick is a Steel Legion character, or rather, he served with the Steel Legion. He is a commissar, so not technically part of the regiment, but he only really ever fought with the Armageddon Steel Legion. I'm going to give them an A+, probably near the top of A. I just love the Armageddon Steel Legion. It's very cool, though of course there is definitely some conflict, sort of looks-wise, with the Krieg. I think they can both happily exist, and their different color schemes definitely aid in that. Next up, we have the Catachan Jungle Fighters, so these are very much a product of the time they came out in. These are very inspired by Rambo, obviously, the big, muscly, headband-wearing, tank-top wearing dude with a huge knife. And the Catachans are pretty cool. They are they hail from Catachan, which is a death world, if you didn't know. Which is why they're just so also abnormally strong, because if you aren't, you just die. They tend to not really tolerate any sort of nonsense. Commissars and commanding officers from other regiments often sort of suffer accidents when serving with the Catachans, which instantly makes them sort of the rebellious type, but the reason that they're allowed to exist is because no one can deny how effective the Catachans are. They are extremely effective stealth units, scout units, just even assault units, really, and they find use in many regiments across the galaxy, and the Catachans are a classic. I'm probably not the biggest fan of them, but that's not to say I dislike them at all. I'm probably going to put them at the top of B tier. I tend to just... that's the wrong guys. I just tend to prefer the more armored look of other regiments. Next up, we have these are the Savlar Chem Dogs, which are definitely a slightly lesser-known regiment, I would say. They served in the Armageddon Wars. They're actually a penal legion, and I really like their lore. I'll give you a quick rundown on it. Obviously, they were raised as a penal legion because they needed more men to feed to the war machine, but the sort of general who raised this regiment was like, these guys could be a very effective fighting force if I, keep them happy. And so what the Savlar Chem Dogs do is they're allowed to keep any spoils of war that they find, so they'll often end up just stopping in the middle of a battlefield to loot somebody they just killed. But if they break any laws, they are immediately sent back to Savlar, which is a horrible planet, covered in noxious fumes, and pretty much everyone there is already in a prison, so you're just going straight back to prison. That does make them a very savage sort of light infantry force. Of course, hardened criminals do tend to make decent fighters, unsurprisingly, especially in the 41st millennium. So I quite like the Savlar Chem Dogs. If you see these guys' miniatures, they're usually just converted from Gene Stealer Colts, which makes perfect sense. But I quite like them. I think they're very cool. And honestly, I think maybe seeing more of them on the tabletop would be very cool. I'm probably going to give them a B tier as well. They're cool, but they don't have a lot going on aside from the fact that they're just kind of funny thieves. Next up, we have a very, I'd say, popular sub-faction of the Guard. We have the Tallarn, who are, of course, the sort of Desert Raider faction. A little bit of almost Lawrence of Arabia vibes going on. Obviously, they're very much inspired by real-world sort of Arabic attire. They're all wearing, I believe it's Shemaya or a Kiaf, I believe is the name of the head scarf adornment that they wear that helps them keep cool in hot environments. They actually have quite a long history. Their world was decimated by the Iron Warriors in the Horus Heresy. That's why it's a desert. So they have developed, just living on that planet has forced them to constantly use APCs and move constantly. So this allows them to be a very, very solid mechanized force that uses a lot of hit-and-run tactics. They tend to favor, of course, ambushes, things like that. And I think their miniatures are quite cool. Would love to see them get an update. I'm going to give these guys, because I do quite like their aesthetic, I'm probably going to give them, I think I'm going to put them just above the Catachans, because I kind of like Tallarn more than I like the Catachans. Here we have another slightly more niche regiment. This is, of course, the Drownyen Fen. So these guys aren't a super fleshed out regiment, but I thought their sort of vibe was cool. They come from a horrible planet, like many regiments of the Imperial Guard do, but they are pretty much an all-infantry force and work as scouts and things like that for infiltrating purposes. And they tend to be quite seen as sort of dour, simple fighters. I just kind of like their aesthetic, mainly because they wear sort of these light armors, rebreathers constantly. They, of course, a lot of these regiments, I didn't even mention them all, fought in the 13th Black Crusade, the defense of Cadian. And they're very, as I mentioned, dour. Their planet is pretty much just one giant swamp, so that's maybe not the most surprising thing. And they function on a sort of clan setting, so they don't have any markings lower than company, usually. They're usually sort of function as like a mob, almost, that splits off to do their own infiltration, just because of their clan heritage, which each member of them wants to bring a lot of honor to the clan that they are from, of course. On their own planet, that usually involves killing each other, but being on the Imperial side, the Imperial Guard, they're sort of being educated, as the Imperials would call it, on more civilized ways of living. In truth, I think they just want them to make it into an even more way of churning out efficient scout infantry. Anyways, they're a very hate-filled and dour force, fit right into 40k, and their aesthetic's pretty cool. I'm also going to give them a B tier, just behind the Catachans. Next up, we have the Elysian Drop Troopers. Now, I'm not the biggest Elysian Drop Trooper fan. I find their armor is very boxy. It almost reminds me of, like, RoboCop in a way. I'm sure the visors don't help with that. They are, of course, mainly used for surgical strikes, dropping in from Valkyries. They do have kind of cool, what is it called, the Catachan las guns, which are bullpup formations, which doesn't make sense, but it looks cool. And obviously the Elysians have sort of just been absorbed by the Tempestus Aquilons. Their jump packs, or drop packs, they're not actually jump packs, are obviously very similar. In general, they were a Forge World line. They had some unique Sentinels, which I actually really like Elysian Sentinels, even though I'm not a big fan of Elysian Drop Troopers. But the main reason that I've kind of fallen out of love with the Elysians is I've just found a cooler version of them while doing research for this video. So I'm going to give the Elysians probably a C tier. I don't really like their armor, and their niche is just kind of filled in better. It's like these are the jump pack guard, if you will, but there's just a cooler version of that that's a little later on in the video. Next up, we have your bog standard Cadians. Now, Cadians are like white bread. It's plain, but it gets the job done. And lore-wise, I think the Cadians are pretty cool. Of course, part of the problem with Cadians is their overexposure. For a long time, they were pretty much the only guard available to collect, at least in plastic. And flavor-wise, they're definitely outdone by a lot of their contemporaries. But lore-wise, being the hardened first line of defense is the Imperium, I think it's just a shame that all of the generic guard regiments are pretty much said to just look like Cadians. It strips a lot of their unique character away. I think they got some of it back with their last update, because it started to introduce things like their tank caps back, and sort of reintroduced the sort of lighter aesthetic instead of the old bulky models. Kind of getting back to their 90s aesthetic, though not fully. I think the Cadians totally, they don't need any more models. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Cadians need more models. I'm just saying that it would have been nice if the Cadians weren't the only Guard available for such a long time, because I think they'd be a lot more popular then. But even withstanding, I like the Cadians a lot. The aesthetic is super cool. It's very sort of cassette futurism. Most of the Imperial Guard are, to be honest, but I like the Cadians. I'm not going to deny it. I'm going to give them an A tier. Next up, we have the Death Corps of Krieg, and Krieg are cool. There's no way of getting around that. They're trench coat wearing, gas mask wearing, helmeted guys from a planet that's been nuked to hell and back, pardon my French. They all live underground, and as a sort of atonement, if you will, for their infighting, they send out, every single Krieger is basically sent out to fight for the Imperium. They make great siege experts, they're great at attritional warfare, and trench warfare especially, unsurprising given their sort of World War I, World War II aesthetics. The only problem I have with Krieg is that Krieg fans just tend to be really unfunny, making the same shovel joke they've been making for probably about 10 years at this point, and, calling them like suicidal, grim, oh, get the shovel. It's just a really unfunny joke, and if you make those jokes, I'm sorry, but they're not funny, and they haven't been funny for a long time. Find new material. Anyways, that rant aside, I quite like the Krieg, don't get me wrong. I collect an army of effectively Krieg, though they are not necessarily all official models, so to speak. I quite like their aesthetic. It's cool, there's a reason they're popular. I just wish that Krieg fans would get new jokes. So, hey, if you're a Krieg fan, maybe try and find something new to joke about. Sorry. I'm giving them S tier, though. Love the Krieg, very cool. Next up, we have the Maccabian Janissaries. These guys are a really cool Imperial Guard formation. They're kind of like elite Imperial Guard, if you will. The Maccabian Militia from Maccabia, I believe is the name of their planet. I know, shocking. Is a standard sort of PDF, Planetary Defense Force setup of guardsmen, but their most elite are sent to join the Janissaries. They're set aside from wearing fully enclosed armor. They wear their chest plates, shoulder plates, and their helmets have the death mask of Saint Drasus, I want to say it is. I'm not going to look it up. I'm just going to trust my gut on that one. But it looks very cool. It makes them look very elite, very special. They're some of the most fanatical fighters in the Imperium. They probably even give the sisters a run for their money. They will fight for as long as they are alive. And even if they do reach the age where retirement is an option, they generally just don't, and will keep fighting until they die. And on the off chance that the Janissaries are effectively retired as a regiment, they will go out to the roads of other Imperial shrine worlds, because they're from a shrine world, and protect pilgrims, usually, just roaming the roads, fighting bandits, things like that. They're a really cool regiment, and I would love to see them get some miniatures. They've never had any miniatures, unfortunately. I think they're a relatively recent sort of advent in 40k, if you will, but easy S tier. I love pretty much any Imperial Guard faction that wears full face masks, so that's an easy one. These are the Chem dogs. No, acid dogs. The Mordant acid dogs. The Mordant acid dogs are, surprisingly enough, not related to the Savlar Chem dogs, despite how similar their names are. But they are mainly used as sort of close quarters light infantry. Not in the same way that like Catachans are, because Catachans are obviously specialized in melee combat. These guys are more so for like tunnel fighting, if I'm not mistaken, things like that, underground, or in super tight corridors. So I assume they would also be deployed in ships, in tight city fighting. They excel in those sort of situations. They travel light, though they are not necessarily the most like refined regiment, if you can believe it, tending to be formed of just the general sort of Imperial Guard aesthetic, though usually lighter. They don't always wear fatigues under their flak armor. They're pretty cool, I will say. They're kind of like the Cadian design, but like more metal, if you will. And generally, the planet they come from isn't, we're not talking a shrine world like those Maccabians. They are from a mining colony that's pretty horrible. And they tend to just be a bunch of gang warfare. So people that join the Mordant acid dogs, tend to just be trying to get away from their home planet. And I love the aesthetic. They look really cool. And being effectively a bunch of they're basically the tunnel snakes in 40k. if you will. I really do like these guys. I think making them as conversions wouldn't be too hard, and if you wanted to go for a Cadian aesthetic but wanted something slightly different, I'd say go with these guys. You would just kind of need to swap out arms for probably Catachan arms, or really any sort of muscular arms would work, and you'd have a really cool force. They're not super strict or organized, so you can really go wild with whatever you want to give them and have a fun time with them. I'm going to give these guys an A tier. I think they look really cool. I'm actually going to put them above the Cadians, purely on the fact that I think they look cooler. Next, we have the Morian Iron Guard. So these are a very strange formation, not just by 40k standards, but just in general. They're a group of Imperial Guard regiment, I should say, funnily enough. They all constantly wear their dress uniforms, which are always multicolored. You'll see blues, reds, yellows, greens, I think even purples, basically any color you want, and they march to battle in formation. So unlike something like the Cadians, who would break off into their squads and their sub-platoons in their regiments, these guys don't do that. Usually, they have scouting units, of course, but their main bulk of their force march to war in formation in a giant block, and they just run through firing, effectively huge firing lines at the enemy. And while they may look like, oh, these are probably some sort of silly guard that never see combat, not true. Morians are very, very well-trained guardsmen. Did I call them Morians? Yeah, the Morians. Sorry, I thought I called them something else. And they are very hard to break. Their morale is extremely high. They are very dedicated to defending their sort of standard, if you will. All of the guards in each of the platoons have to swear to never let that fall, and they stand by that word. And I would love to see these guys get an updated unit set, even if it's just one unit. I think it would be really cool to see the Morians get updated. Probably not the highest on my list of regiments I want to see fleshed out. Obviously, Catachans need their update first. I'd like to see Tallarn after that, and Steel Legion sort of Steel Legion or Tallarn after that. But I could see Mordians then, though even still, I'd say they're still relatively far down. Mordians are more funny than cool, in my opinion. I do like them. I think they're a very interesting take on the classic marching to war aesthetic. But that's just about all my thoughts on them. I'm going to give them a B tier, probably around the Savlar Chem dogs. Cool, not my favorite though. Hold on. Alright, we're back. So, sorry, I just had to grab one more picture because one of the regiments was missing, so we had to rectify that. Whoops. Sorry, just had to deal with some, had to reformat my windows. Sorry, we're getting off track here. Let's reel it in. Next up, we have the Tanith First and Only. So Tanith First and Only are possibly the smallest regiment of guards still around. They are, of course, the stars of the Gaunt's Ghosts books, which everyone likes Ibram Gaunt. He's just a real stand-up guy. Who doesn't like him? I don't think I've ever met someone who didn't. In the Tanith, they specialize, unsurprisingly, because they're such a small regiment. They focus on hit-and-run tactics, scouting tactics, infiltration, specialist insertion missions. They're very elite and very hardened veterans, though, of course, there's only, I think, about 1,000 of them left. Not many, especially for an Imperial Guard regiment. There might even be less than that. I think I might be overestimating. But the Tanith look very cool. They're very distinctive with their ghillie sort of cloaks, which are hallmark of not just the unit, but also, I believe, from Tanith itself. And it's a cool regiment, though the only reason that it's even on this list is because of Gaunt, which is, of course, bonus points. You have a Gaunt in your army. It's not too... I'm going to keep it like that. Sorry. Intrusive thoughts. But yeah, these guys, very cool, but not much distinct flavor going on. They're kind of just the standard guardsmen, but they wear ghillie cloaks or camo cloaks. I'll give them a B. That's as high as I'll go. Next, we have the Valhallan Frost Warriors. Is that it? Yeah, something like that. Valhallan Ice Warriors, actually, I think it is. Unsurprisingly, these guys are sort of based on your Russian sort of World War II aesthetic going on, kind of. But the Valhallans are pretty old, obviously. They're one of the classic guard regiments. And they're famous for being like impossible to break. They're some of the like most resilient defensive forces in the Imperium. Once they take ground, they will not cede it until literally every last one of them is dead. Also, they did have a bit of a starring role in, I believe it was Caiaphas Cain's first book, which bonus points because Caiaphas Cain is cool. But obviously, they're very heavily inspired by Russian sort of Eastern European ice or winter uniforms because Valhalla is a frozen planet basically, and they have had a pretty rocky history. Their planet, of course, became an ice planet, which no one wants, and then they immediately got attacked by some orcs, which then sort of reinforced their need to make an extremely large and defensive force that is pretty much, they place you on an objective and you're not supposed to let it go. And that's what the Valhallans do best. And they are tenacious fighters, pretty cool. Aesthetic-wise, not the most interesting. While they, of course, still use las guns, the rest of the aesthetic is just kind of boring. This is one of the few uniforms that just feels like, oh, this is a World War II uniform transplanted into 40k. Which you could say with the Krieg, but I think they're... I think the Krieg sort of just pull that look off better, mainly because of their gas masks. It's just an inherently more dystopian, oppressive look than the Valhallans, which the Valhallans I wouldn't say are like an oppressive force or anything. That's not a problem. But there's just not a whole lot to latch onto. They're one of the regiments I forget, mainly because I think they're kind of outdone by their... There's no real relation in lore, but the cooler version of the Valhallans, which earns them a spot in C tier. I'm going to put them above the Elysians just because I kind of don't like Elysians that much, unsurprisingly. So we have, of course, the Vostroyan Firstborn. So the Vostroyan Firstborn have been part of the Empire for a very long time, the Imperium, sorry, very long time. The reason that they are called the Vostroyan Firstborn is that since the Horus Heresy, when the Emperor called for men and women from all of the Imperial planets to form the Imperial Army, Vostroya was saying, let us focus on making weapons and arms and armor. And if we send off our people, we won't have a workforce. And unsurprisingly, not only was the Imperium, or the Empire of Man at that point, and the later Imperium were rather understanding, and surprisingly, even after the war, they were like, okay, that's fine. But Vostroya didn't feel that way, obviously, given how horrible the Horus Heresy was. So now, even 10,000 years later, every firstborn of a Vostroyan family is immediately sent off to join the Vostroyan Firstborns. They're very, very sort of... what's the word I'm looking for? Like, they fight with an unmatched sort of loyalty to the Emperor. And the Empire, like the Imperial ideals and everything like that. They're famous not only for their very unique aesthetic of their gas masks, or sort of sea burn, if you want to call it, hazardous environment, whatever you want to call it. They usually wear these golden sort of brass gas masks with their striking red robes and then their sort of ornate armor alongside their tall, not sure the exact word, Ushanka? It's not a Ushanka, but it's in like that family of hat. Obviously very heavy sort of like a Tsar Imperial Russia aesthetic, definitely. And because Vostroya was as a planet that primarily makes weaponry, the Vostroyans are very well armed and armored. All their weapons are very ornate. Everything has a sort of almost steampunk kind of aesthetic, which I love. I think the Vostroyans are cool, if you couldn't tell. And they've just been criminally underrepresented. I want to see these guys get a kill team and then a whole range refresh, just like the Krieg got. So honestly, I think they might be my favorite regiment, just looks-wise. If you look at the artwork of them, not necessarily their pretty dated metal models, you realize just how cool they look. And I think it's just a shame they don't have any modern models. The Vostroyans are just fantastic. And I want to see them get an update because I would love to have some modern Vostroyans just to have the models. Easy S tier. Next we have the Attilan Rough Riders. So Attilan Rough Riders isn't really the right thing. It's, I think, I actually don't know the name of their, like, actual regiment, because the Attilan Rough Riders aren't just Rough Riders, and Rough Riders are formed by other factions. The Chem Dogs use them, obviously. Tallarn actually uses its own variant of Rough Riders with something called Mukali, which is these giant kind of Paraceratherium animals, if you know what I'm talking about. It might just sound completely insane. But I do believe the Attilans had some infantry models, but regardless, I'm just going to call them Rough Riders because, well, that's what they're most known for, obviously. They go for Mongol aesthetic. They all wield these cool lances, and they're riding on horses. Very cool. Again, very World War I inspired, as that was a lot of Imperial Guard is inspired by World War I. Tanks have sponsons. Bayonets are constant. The weapons are modeled more after long rifles. The armor and uniforms are very World War I. If you didn't know that, now you do. But I think the Attillans are totally fine. Obviously, they're just kind of Mongols in space, which does give them slightly conflicting vibes with the White Scars, though I think that's not really a big importance, even though they're both sort of going for the same aesthetic, though I think technically, I can't believe I didn't realize this. What am I talking about? Attila and Rough Riders. Attila the Hun. They're based on the Huns, not the Mongols. What am I talking about? I'm sure there's already comments about it. But, oh my god, that completely changes my whole thought process. How did I not realize that? Attila. Oh my god. I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, apparently. Well, that does give them a lot of their own unique personality. You don't see too many things in fantasy or in fiction based off of the Huns. But oh my god, I've completely derailed my train of thought. It's completely gone. What was I thinking? What was I thinking? Where did I get the Mongol inspiration? The fur hats? Doesn't even make any sense. What is up with me? Huh. Wow, I am a fraud. Anyways, let's get on. We're getting derailed. Oh, I just feel so dumb. Anyways, Attilan Rough Riders. I'm just going to give them a B tier. I like them. I just feel stupid for not realizing that the people called Attila are based after Attila the Hun. Man! Hey, you know, I always say Warhammer fans have goldfish brains, and I just proved that right. Anyways, let's move on. We're getting derailed. Let's reel it in, everybody. Next up, Skull Takers, right? These are the, Canak Skull Takers. So, Canak Skull Takers are an interesting regiment that doesn't have a whole lot of lore, and also not a lot going on visually, because they're basically just guardsmen that don't wear shirts. But the reason for that is they're not abhumans, but they're a lot closer to Ogryns than they are to regular people. They're described as savage, not very intelligent. Most of them don't even use las guns. They just go into battle with a melee weapon and a las pistol, or 2 melee weapons. And honestly, there's not much going on with these guys. They're just kind of the brute archetype, which I prefer the Catachans for my muscled out Imperial Guard. And I think these guys are just kind of whatever. I think the Canak Skull Takers, they're too bland, and they're not even that, like, there's not much on them. They're just guardsmen that are buff, and the Catachan already do that. These guys have no sort of, at least not that I can think of, no direct sort of cultural inspiration like many of the Guard do. But I think they are boring. I'm going to give them D tier. So you know how I mentioned I lost all my love for the Elysian drop troopers while making this video? That's because I found these guys, the Harakoni Warhawks, which is a sort of genre, almost, a regiment of Imperial Guard that are the cooler Elysian drop troopers. Now, if you look at this picture, I know it's a little small. They're basically drop Khazarkin, which is just so cool, because Khazarkin are the coolest infantry the Imperial Guard can field, and you put jump packs on them? That's awesome. Their las guns aren't bullpup, but instead folding stock, which not only makes more sense logistics-wise, is a lot more unique than even the regular bullpups of the Elysians. Sorry, completely brain farted there. But these guys are just so cool. Not a lot on them. They've never had official models, but I really want to make some. Definitely need to get some jump packs, another box of Khazarkin, and get these guys and make them, because Khazarkins with jump packs is just so cool. I love the Harakoni Warhawks. GW, if you're hearing my psychic messages, make these into a unit. I know the Guard just got their release. Make them a kill team. I don't care if they're like the Tempestus Aquilons. These guys are way cooler. It's the same way Khazarkin are cooler than Tempestus Scions. Harakoni Warhawks are cooler than Tempestus Aquilons. Oh, okay. Now that that's over. Easy guess here. No doubt in my mind. No doubt in my mind. Next we have the Pretorian Guard. These are a pretty cool design. They're very much based off of the redcoats of colonial England in Africa, specifically, given the pith helms and everything, which, obviously, a very bloody point in history. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about the Imperial Guard. And these guys look cool. They're basically privy British gentlemen guardsmen. They are very cool design-wise. It's taking that classic design. It does what the Valhallan Ice Warriors, I think, failed to do in taking a classical design and turning it into something very cool. Because these guys, they're still wearing the armor. They've got the bionics a little bit more on display. And I think they pull off the look much cooler, in my opinion. And I would love to see these guys get a proper update just because they've been out of it for a long time. They do function. They're also kind of not only cooler in concept than the Valhallans, they're kind of cooler Morians because they look cooler, not as weirdly like Skittles vomit as the Morians. As these guys, unsurprisingly, like the Redcoats, like to function in firing lines where they like all line their guns at once and fire in one big volley to annihilate their enemies. And I just really like the Praetorians, and I want to see them get an update. That's true of a lot of the Imperial Guards, but these guys are criminally outdated on their models. They get artwork, like as you can see. But yeah, they're just really behind on the updates. I'm going to give them an A tier. Anyways, I've been Spoons Rattling. I will see you all in the next video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Let me know what you think down below. Are you a big Skull Takers fan? Are you a big Elysian Drop Troopers fan? Are you calling me stupid for not realizing that the people named after Attila the Hun are based on Attila the Hun? Please, I swear I'm not that dumb. It's an honest mistake. Anyways, I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.